If you've ever made a wrap top that gapes open, shifts when you move, or just doesn't sit right, this video is for you. The secret to a perfect wrap top isn't just in the sewing, but also how you draft it. In today's tutorial, we will learn step by step how to draft a beautiful wrap top pattern that fits your body, flatters your curve, and stays securely in place. You can start with your basic bodice block if you have it. But in this video, we are going to draft everything from scratch. So I'll start by leaving about 1 inch from the top of the paper and draw a straight line which I'll use as my start point. And that line will also be my shoulder guideline. I then trace the edge of my paper where I'll use as my center back to be a straight line. So I'll go ahead and then draw a straight line to use as my center back line. On the shoulder guideline, measure and mark half of your across shoulder measurement, which in this case is 7 inches. Because the shoulder measurement is 14, 14 divided by 2 is 7 inches. So I'll measure and mark 7 inches on the shoulder guideline like so. Still on the shoulder guideline, measure and mark your neck width measurement, which in this case I'm using 3 inches. So from the center back line, measure and mark 3 inches on the shoulder line like so. Now we need the depth of our back neck measurement. So measuring from the shoulder guideline, measure down 1 inch and mark. Join the 1 inch mark to the 3 inches mark to create the back neck curve like so. Now we need our shoulder slope line. So where we marked half our shoulder measurement, measure down 1 inch. Join this mark to the tip of the neck to create the shoulder slope line like so. Now we need our armhole measurement or our chest line. So measuring from the shoulder, measure and mark half of your armhole measurement, which in this case is 7 inches. So I'll measure down 7 inches and draw the chest line like so. Now I need to create the armhole line, so I'll measure the shoulder line on the chest line to get a straight line. Now on the armhole line, look for the midpoint and make a mark there. Then on the chest line, input 1/4 of your bust circumference measurement, which in this case I'm using 8.5 inches. So I'll measure and mark 8.5 inches on the chest line and make a mark. Join this mark to the half armhole mark you made to create the curve like so. Now we need our top length measurement. So measuring from the shoulder line, measure and mark the length of the top you want. In this case, I'm using 18 inches. So I'll measure and mark 18 inches like so and create a straight line, which I'll use as my waistline or the top length line. On the top length line, measure and mark 1/4 of your waist circumference measurement. Join the mark on the waist to the chest line. Create the side seam line like so. The back part of your wrap top is ready. Go ahead and add all the necessary seam allowance you will need. So I'm adding 1 inch seam allowance to the hem side and then the side seam. Then I'll add 1/2 inch seam allowance to the armhole, shoulder, then back neckline. You will not be adding any zipper allowance to the center back because this is a wrap top and doesn't require a zipper. Join all the seam allowance points to create the seam allowance line or the cutting line like so. Please don't forget to label your pattern with the pattern name and cutting instructions. Now the back pattern of your wrap top is ready. Go ahead and cut out the pattern. Be sure to cut on the cutting line, that's the seam allowance line. You can create the front part of your wrap top from the back by tracing the back onto a fresh sheet of paper and making the necessary adjustments to the armhole and then the neckline or center front line. But in this video, I'll go ahead and draft the front from scratch so that we all get the concept. This is a sneak peek on how to use the back to create the front, but I'll not go in details in this video. If you want a detailed video, I still have the clip and I can upload it for you. Just let me know in the comment section. As I said before, we are drafting the front from scratch, so let's go ahead and do that. We will start with a fresh sheet of paper with a width measuring half of our bust circumference measurement, and the length is the length of our top plus any necessary seam allowance. To draft the front, we first need to leave some few inches before we draw the center front line. So in this case, I left about 1/4 of my bust circumference measurement. Then draw a straight line with this measurement to create the center front line. I used the bust circumference measurement because I wanted room to make any necessary adjustment or any necessary alteration I will need. So if you don't want that, you can just use 1/4 of your waist circumference plus any necessary seam allowance you will need. Now we need the shoulder guideline. So I'll leave about 1 inch from the top of the paper and draw a straight line, which I'll use as my shoulder guideline. On the shoulder guideline, measure and mark half of your across shoulder measurements. Then go down by 1 inch to create the shoulder slope line. Still on the shoulder guideline, measure and mark your neck width measurement, which in this case I'm using 3 inches. So from the center front line, I'll measure and mark 3 inches on the shoulder line like so. Join the shoulder slope mark to the tip of the neck to create the shoulder line like so. Now from the shoulder slope mark, measure and mark half of your armhole measurement, which in this case is 7 inches. So I'll measure and mark 7 inches and draw the chest guideline. Now on the chest guideline, I'll measure and mark the shoulder measurement, which is 7 inches, to join to the shoulder slope to get the armhole line. On the armhole line, look for the midpoint and make a mark. Then from that mark, go in by 1/2 inch. On the chest line, input 1/4 of your bust circumference measurement and mark. Then join the mark to the 1/2 inch mark you made on the armhole. Then to the shoulder slope line to create the front armhole curve like so. Now we need the length of our top. So measuring from the shoulder, measure and mark the length of the top you want to use, which in this case I'm using 18 inches. So I'll measure and mark 18 inches and draw a line to use as my hem guideline. On the hem guideline, measure and mark 1/4 of your waist circumference measurement, which in this case I'm using 6.5. So I'll measure and mark 6.5 and mark like so. Join this mark to the chest line to create the side seam line for the front. We need to extend the hem line to the space we left before. Now on the extension line, measure and mark 1/4 of your waist circumference measurement, which in this case I'm using 6.5. So from the center front line, measure out on the extension line 6.5 and mark like so. Now we need the depth of our neck. So measuring from the shoulder line, measure and mark the depth you want for your top. In this case I'm using 7 inches. So I'll measure and mark 7 inches on the center front line like so. Join the neck width mark to the neck depth mark to create a V-neck like so. On the extension line, where I measured and marked my half my waist circumference measurement, I'll measure up 2 inches. This is an allowance I am creating to be able to join the belt I'll be using for the wrap top. So this is more of style preference. It's not a must that you have to go up by 2 inches or 1 inch. You can even join it to the extension mark. That's where the 6.5 inches mark is to create the overlap. Join the 2 inches mark to the depth of the neck with a slant line like so. This creates the overlap for the wrap top. The front part of your pattern is also ready. Go ahead and add all the necessary seam allowance you will need. So in this case, I'm 1 inch hem allowance to the bottom of the top, then 1 inch side seam allowance to the side of the top, then 1/2 inch seam allowance to the armhole, shoulder, and then the neckline, then 1/2 inch to the 2 inches to the other side seam or the overlap side to be able to join the belt to the top or to be able to fold the overlap side. Join all the points to create the seam allowance lines like so. The front part of your pattern is also ready. Go ahead and label the pattern with the pattern name and cutting instruction. Then cut out your pattern. Please be sure to cut on the cutting line or the seam allowance lines. So this is how your pattern will look like after cutting. Was this video helpful? If it was, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more easy pattern drafting and sewing tutorials. Share with people who will be interested in this kind of content. If you have any question, feel free to write it in the comment section. I love to hear from you. And don't forget to check my other pattern drafting videos on the channel. Until next time, bye bye for now.